Welcome back, class. This is semester number 2, lesson number 11. And our aim today is how did the United States create a sphere of influence over the Western Hemisphere? And when we look at this aim, I want to make sure we understand the concept of sphere of influence. All right. The Western Hemisphere, which, basically is made up of North America and South America, was really, for all intents and purposes, under the influence or kind of run with the control of the United States during this time period, which was very symbolic of their imperialistic views. Um, how did the United States create this power they had over the entire Western Hemisphere? So today we're talking about United States imperialism, but more specifically, we're talking about the intervention and protection of Latin America. All right, and when we talk about Latin America, we're talking about you know south of the United States. Just a refresher of something we talked about earlier in the year that is going to be kind of connected to what we're talking about today. The James Monroe, all right, the fifth president of the United States in Latin America. What did he do in Latin America that kind of set the stage for this? All right, there were South and Central America revolutions. These revolutions were successful in ridding Latin America of European rule. So James Monroe and Secretary of State John Quincy Adams, who we saw in the movie Amistad, created the Monroe Doctrine. And what the Monroe Doctrine said was, Europe stay in your half of the world and we'll stay in our half, and there'll be no problems. If you guys remember, we're talking about that, right? The U.S. said that if Europe came over to the Western Hemisphere, the United States would get involved. They'd be like a big brother, a protectorate of the entire Western Hemisphere. All right, and the U.S. said if Europe stays out of Latin America, the United States would stay out of Europe. All right, this was supported by Great Britain and Latin America. This reflected neutrality, right? Staying neutral, not getting involved. Isolationism, non-involvement with foreign affairs, and the U.S. concern to stop European expansion to the Western Hemisphere. Their big fear, the United States' big fear, was Europe being in the western half of the world. So if they could stop that from happening, they felt it would be beneficial. Now, when we talk about this is in the early 1800s. About 100 years later, the Roosevelt Corollary becomes an extension of the Monroe Doctrine. The Roosevelt Corollary is basically adding on to the Monroe Doctrine, and it was created by President Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, in 1904. It stated that the United States would not only ban outside intervention in Latin American affairs, but would also police the area to guarantee that the countries met their obligations, their international agreements. So what does that mean? The United States now had naval ships basically surrounding all of Latin America. And the point to this is they were kind of the police of Latin America. They wanted to ensure that no European influence was coming into the country. And if we look on the right here, this is one of many cartoons dealing with Teddy Roosevelt and the Monroe Doctrine and Latin America. All right. Think about this as America flexing its muscles in the world, in the world stage, and saying, "Hey, this is our part of the world. You're not coming in, and if you do, there's going to be violence." So why did they intervene? Why did they get involved? The U.S. wanted to stabilize the economic affairs of small states in the Caribbean and Central America. They wanted to stop European nations from gaining control of unstable nations in Latin America. And the U.S. viewed Latin America as an agency for expanding U.S. commercial interest in the region. So there's a lot of ways you can go about this, but really, why did they intervene? And when we say the word intervene, all right, you guys might want to write this down. Intervene means to get involved with. Why did they step in? Why did they put their business into it? All right. They really wanted to ensure a few things. They wanted to ensure that Latin America was stable. Because if it's stable, that means there's no war, there's no fighting, and that means that there's less problems for the United States, their neighbors to the north, to have to deal with. They also wanted to make sure that they could benefit off of Latin America. And that just connects to the word imperialism, right? They wanted to make sure that they could benefit off these small countries in Latin America. So there was a few reasons for intervening, and those were some of them. Here's a map of Latin America that looks at the Roosevelt Corollary's influence, all right? And we see, you know, We have Nicaragua, we have Cuba, Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. All right. Um, we have parts of Venezuela, Panama, and we're going to talk about Panama a little bit more in a second. But really, this is Latin America right here, and this is where the United States really had their influence. All right, and they wanted to ensure that Europe was not involved in this. So, what were the results of the Roosevelt Corollary? What happened because of the Roosevelt Corollary? The Roosevelt Corollary gave justification for the United States intervention of Cuba, Nicaragua, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic. It basically made the United States, for lack of a better word, the big brother of the Western Hemisphere. They controlled the entire Western Hemisphere. All right. If something was going on in the Western Hemisphere, the United States was the one that was involved. They were the ones controlling everything. All right. And this was basically because A, they were powerful, B, they had an extremely powerful navy, and C, they were imperialistic, right? They wanted to spread their markets and their power outside of the United States, and they wanted to spread it to different parts of the world, and this was a way in which they could do so. When we talk about their presence in Latin America and in the Caribbean and all that, sometimes the word big stick diplomacy comes in. All right, and big stick diplomacy is something that Teddy Roosevelt made up. And during his speech, he said, "You speak softly and carry a big stick." And I want you guys to break that down. What does that mean? All right, speak softly and carry a big stick. Basically, what he's saying is, you don't say much. You don't give these threats. You don't do this. You don't do that. Instead, you make yourself look threatening. And how did the United States look threatening? Well, they put their battleships all around Latin America, surrounded it. So if there was a ship coming from Europe, they saw the amount of ships that the United States had surrounding Latin America, and it was threatening. All right, just think about it like, uh, you know, if you're gonna if you see a fight going on and the fight hasn't started yet, and there's one person standing there and they're just, you know, they're well built and they're this and that, people are going to be afraid of them. All right, and that's what the United States wanted to do. They wanted to instill fear. They didn't say much. All right, they didn't use these threats and say, every day, hey, don't come over here. They just put their ships all around Latin America and made basically a silent threat. All right. And really, with this, the United States would use peaceful methods to protect its interests, but if necessary, they would use military force. All right. Big stick diplomacy was used during the canal diplomacy, which we're going to talk about in a second, in which the diplomatic actions of the U.S. were questioned as they pursued building a canal across Central America. During this time, a lot of European countries and a lot of Latin American countries too are starting to look at the United States as kind of a bully. All right, that kind of they flex their muscles and get what they want because they are the most powerful country, and we're going to talk about that more right now. So here are a few pictures of big stick diplomacy. All right, these do come up on the regions from time to time, so take a few seconds to look at these. Um, yeah, the one on the right and the one on the bottom, I have seen on numerous regions exams. All right, just make sure you kind of have an understanding of what these are and what's being said in these pictures. The next thing we're going to talk about, the final thing we're going to talk about today, is the Panama Canal. All right, and why the Panama Canal is important to the United States at this time. The Panama Canal connected the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. All right, Roosevelt felt the United States needed a route connecting Atlantic and Pacific Ocean through Central America. This made trade and transportation simpler for the United States. It connected the East and West Coast easier. I want you to think how hard it would have been, or how hard it used to be, to get a boat from the eastern shore to the western shore. So from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. So say from New York to California. All right. So say the boat started in New York, it would have to go all the way south under the tip of South America and then go back up north towards California. All right. That took way too much time and it was unnecessary. If we look at the picture on the right here, in Panama, which is really kind of Latin America, Central America area, there was a place in Panama where there was not much land between the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean. All right, and rather than having them go all the way around the south part, I'm sorry, go all the way around the tip of South America. All right, the United States kind of pushed forth an idea to make a canal, all right, a man-made waterway through Panama that connected the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. All right. The only problem was this wasn't really American land at all, but they kind of bullied their way in there because they saw the benefit for them. This idea of the Panama Canal shows a real imperialistic concept, right? Building a canal in a land that's not even theirs because it was going to be beneficial to them. And here are some pictures of the canal. All right. The canal was eventually given back to Panama, but for a while it was controlled by the United States, even though it was in Panama. Your check for understanding. It's a quote from Theodore Roosevelt. It says, I took the canal and let Congress debate. And the question says, this quotation best demonstrates 1. An effort by the president to maintain a policy of isolationism. 2. A decline in the use of militarism as a defense policy. 3. An increased reliance on the legislative process. Or 4. A presidential action that achieved a foreign policy objective. And we will answer this question together in class, but I want you to try to use some test taking strategies. Eliminate some choices, all right, and try to find the correct answer. All right, here's another check for understanding. During the late 19th century, during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the United States policy towards Latin America was most strongly characterized by 1. Friendship and trust. 2. Intervention and paternalism. 3. Tolerance and humanitarianism. Or 4. Indifference and neglect. Our pair work assignment. You are going to, with a partner, create an intervention policy to help out a country that is struggling. The policy should include the following. 1. Reason why the intervention is necessary. 2. What will the policy include? And 3. What will you gain from intervening and helping the struggling country? And here is an example, all right, just one I made up for intervening in Syria, just to give you guys an idea. Do not use this, obviously. We will talk more about this during class, but if you have any questions, please feel free to write them down. Also, make sure you are developing